Welcome to a comprehensive guide on how to push the absolute limits in the Incursions. And right now is a great time to, because there's a special event going on, special objective, where if you can push to zones 10, 15, and 20, you're able to claim some 6-star Sig stones. And these things, they're hard to come by. There's 30 here in total, which is actually more than what was available from the Cyber Monday offerings for 15,000 units. Just let that sink in for a minute. So this guide's going to cover the best champions to use, the best hacks to pick up, the best item use practices, free healing techniques, mastery manipulation, and some other generalized tips as well. Let's start with champions. There are too many champions in this game for me to go through each and every single one of them, plus the game changes as time goes on. So I'm going to give you guys some general concepts and show you examples of champions that excel here, starting with Apocalypse. So the Incursions, they act as one big quest, which means if you use something like Apocalypse's Horseman ability to turn your mutants into a Horseman of Apocalypse, and you see how it says they become a Horseman of Apocalypse for the rest of the quest, that means until you're done with the Incursions, that champion is a Horseman. So using someone like Apocalypse early on, turning one of your champions into a Horseman, and then removing him in the next room, that is something that I highly recommend. Can't recommend it enough. Odin is soon to be released. He's going to have a similar type of an ability as well. So make sure you guys are taking advantage of these pre-fights that will last the entire duration of the Incursions. While we're looking at Apocalypse and talking about Horsemen, I'm actually going to start with Gambit. Now, Gambit is not someone that I've personally used in the Incursions. However, I've heard from others that he's good in there. And what I want to focus on is just the perfect block chance. So Gambit can gain up to 100% perfect block chance. And as we move on to the next couple of champions, I'll explain exactly why that's so important. So the next one up, let's look at another mutant here in Magneto. So Magneto, he's good for a number of reasons. First off, there are a ton of metal champions in this game just in general, but right now, every 5 rooms that you go through, it's an Ultron room or a robot room where every single opponent is a robot, and you're going to have this magnet ability active to give you plus 50% perfect block chance, among other bonuses, but again, it's that perfect block chance that is so strong. These opponents inside of the Incursions, their attack gets so high that if you slip up at all when you're trying to intercept or something like that, you're probably dead. And they hit into your block so hard that if you don't have something like perfect block there to kind of back you up and mitigate that damage, well, you're also going to have a pretty bad time. So again, perfect block is so strong and sometimes necessary to have in the Incursions. So Magneto, another great champion for it. Next up, we have Morningstar, a champion that's typically too annoying to use in the average quest, where it can take you more than half of the quest to build her up, then you only have her at her max potential for a couple of fights. It's usually not recommended in the standard quest. However, inside of the Incursions, when you're pushing 10, 15, potentially 20 rooms deep, and it only takes you 1 or 2 rooms to fully build her up, and then you get bonuses like this, where you're going to have 50% perfect block chance. Again, that perfect block chance is so crucial. And then we also have a chance to regen some of the damage dealt to the opponent. And this chance to regen gets amplified by all the hacks that boost up your attack and everything like that. So sometimes you can go from having very little life with Morningstar all the way up to that full yellow bar, that 100% health. And yeah, I can't recommend Morningstar enough. She's super strong in the Incursions. Looking at another ramp-up style champion here in Aegon, who suffers kind of a similar problem to Morningstar, where in the average quest, it just takes too long to build him up. But inside of the Incursions, it is possible to fully ramp up Aegon, and there are a few tricks that you can use to get this guy ramped up. And although he doesn't have perfect block, if you can fully ramp him up, you can make it so that your next hit is unblockable, which means you don't have to block to get your openings. So you don't have to take all that chip damage, and it's basically the same thing, same effect as having perfect block, but just in a different toolkit here. So some things that you can do to help ramp up Aegon more is you can avoid all of the best hacks early on. That way it takes more hits to get through your fights. If you want, you could even drop your offensive mastery tree completely, just so that you're doing less damage, as little damage as possible to extend the duration of these fights. And as an extra little bonus that you don't always have control over, what you can do is you can look for certain nodes that you can basically indefinitely stay in that fight until you're done, until you are finished ramping up. Something like aggression regen, where you can let the opponent just regenerate their health and take breaks between hitting them to keep ramping up, or something like power shield, where you just don't throw a special and you're good there too. So Aegon, in the, as long as you're willing to take that time to ramp him up, can be super strong. Next up, we have Hyperion, and I just want to focus on one part of his kit, and it follows that same line of thinking as the perfect block and the unblockable hits of Aegon. It's all about avoiding that damage. These are long fights that you have to be in with opponents that have high amounts of attack, so you got to reduce that damage somehow. And the way that a champion like Hyperion can do it is because Hyperion has power gain buffs. So you're able to intercept with your specials. That's safer than the standard intercept, or you're able to just use your specials more frequently to keep pushing the opponent's power meter, and then dex their specials to get your openings. So Hyperion's another great champion for it. Also, we're going to talk about hacks later on, but champions that have some sort of stun on their abilities, there's a hack that will increase your ability accuracy with specials, and it can allow you to potentially stun lock the opponents. And I have done that to save me in some really difficult matchups. Quake is another one where, of course, in the right hands, you're making 0 contact with the opponent, which not only means you're taking 0 damage, but you're also playing around the myriad of random nodes and opponents that you have to face, and you don't have to worry about dexing specials. It just quakes. I want to give a quick mention to someone like Warlock here, just because he's packed with immunities, and if you come across a high-level abomination or an Iceman, you better have some way of dealing with it. So you might not necessarily want to start out the run with a champion like Warlock, but have him ready to swap in at a later time. And the last champion that I want to show before moving on to the next category, talking about the nodes, is Thing. So in the Incursions, the opponents get tons of attack, which means they're going to be triggering Thing's protection constantly. Again, Thing is not a champion that you want to start the run with, but you can swap them in once things get really difficult, and then just keep your rock stacks up. You want them to be as high as Sig level as possible. Ideally, we're talking Sig 200 here, and then as long as you have 20 rock stacks, when protection is triggered, you will take 0 damage. Combine that with certain masteries or certain nodes that will keep a debuff on yourself, and with willpower healing, yeah, Thing is actually a beast for some of these high level zones. There are plenty of other great champions that I'm not going to go through one by one, like Angela or Claire, because they have that sustainability, or someone like Torch that you'd bring in for just a specialty fight. But again, I can't go through every single fight in here. So let's talk a little bit more about the hacks themselves that you want to be picking up. Now, it's not that easy for me to show certain hacks here, since the game won't let me actually click on the module before arriving to that zone. Not to mention, the best hacks that you can pick up largely depends on the champions that you're bringing in, but I want to focus on some of my favorite hacks that are good in almost any situation, starting with my favorite 2 boss hacks. So the first one is Buff Cornucopia. Buff Cornucopia, it gives you a 50% chance to gain another random buff anytime you gain a buff. And certain champions like Magneto with his prowess, or Angela with her natural buffs, like, gaining buffs is not that hard for some champs, and just having another chance to gain a random buff, like, you can stack up regenerations or just other damage increasing hacks that get you through the fight faster. Buff Cornucopia has saved me on a number of occasions. My second favorite boss hack is Perpetual Offense, which gives you prowess each time you activate a special. It can stack up to 3 times, but it essentially can give you a 180% increase in special attack damage. And when you amplify that on top of the other damage increasing hacks, like, you get some ridiculous numbers, man. So Perpetual Offense, another insane boss hack. Let's move away from the boss hacks and talk about some of my favorite normal hacks. Now, I already mentioned one of them when I was talking about Hyperion, that increases your ability accuracy when using specials. And this really is going to depend on who you're bringing in, but let me tell you, man, it has saved a run before, having that hack with Hyperion, where you can spam special 2s and have a much higher chance to stun them than if you didn't have the hack. So yeah, it's a great hack to have in the right situation. Outside of that, some of my favorites are just ways to increase your overall crit chance, because so much of our damage in this game comes from critical hits, those big yellow numbers that we all love to see. So, you know, of course you don't need it if you're using someone like Ghost or Corvus or Aegon, but for the average champion, just having a way to increase your crit rate is so strong. So the plus 1000 crit rating, or the hack that increases your crit chance on specials, both great hacks to have. And the last two that I want to mention are actually the resistance hacks, physical resistance and energy resistance. There's one for 1600 physical resistance that will reduce all physical damage by about 40%. And then there's a 2000 energy resistance hack that reduces all energy resistance that you're going to take, all energy damage that you're going to take by about 50%. And let me tell you, when you come across a high level magic, you need one of two things. One, you need a way to prevent her from ever triggering limbo at all. So using someone like Quake, for example, or you really need to have a high amount of energy resistance. And picking up a hack like this to reduce that incoming damage by 50%, that could be a run saver. So whereas other nodes, yeah, they'll help you to get through a fight, you know, a little bit faster, sometimes you just need to survive. So picking something up like energy resistance can actually be a really big deal. And while we're on the subject of magic, let's actually talk about some ways to manipulate your masteries a little bit, starting with one of the most obvious. If you do come across that high level magic and you're trying to prevent her from triggering her limbo, then of course you'll want to swap on a mastery like Pacify. Some other mastery swap examples, of course, if you're using Mystic champions, you'll want to be running Mystic Dispersion. That's kind of obvious. Less obvious is the Resonate mastery here. So there's a boss hack called Tide of Combat, which says, every single time you land a non-damaging debuff on the opponent, when that debuff expires, you have a chance to gain a Fury buff. So picking up something like the Resonate hack, listen, that could be a run saver. And I know it's a pain to swap around masteries, especially a mastery that's so deep in the defensive tree here. But if you have to spend, 50 or 100 units to change around your masteries, that could be much fewer units than it would cost to use the expensive items, expensive incursion items to save your run. So definitely consider, if you're going for a big push, like the level 20 push, then yeah, when you pick up Tide of Combat, you probably do want to throw on Resonate. There are times where Resonate can actually hurt you, though, if, for example, the opponent has, some sort of interaction with a debuff, like maybe Masochism, where you didn't want to have Resonate on the opponent. So you got to pay attention to what you're doing. Here's an obvious one: Willpower, the absolute most valuable mastery, hands down, as far as I'm concerned, outside of parry and dexterity, which are essentially required masteries. But Willpower is the most valuable mastery in the game outside of those two. If you don't already have Willpower, what are you doing? Please get this mastery, unlock it, put 3 points into it. You'll save a countless amount of units. It's expensive to get at first, but for the love of God, please just get Willpower into your masteries. It is so damn strong, not just for the incursions, but for virtually everywhere in the game as well. Something that's not going to bring you a lot of value, however, are the suicide masteries. So suicides in a standard questing situation, they're fine because you're only going through a few fights. So if you have to take a little bit of damage from recoil, so be it. You don't get any bonus points for finishing a quest with a full yellow bar. If you can go through there faster, why not? But in something like the incursions, well, you're in there for so long that, yeah, that little 5% damage on your specials, it really adds up. Not to mention, you're already gaining so much boosted attack that the attack gain that you get from Liquid Incursion and Double Edge, it's not as impactful inside of something like the incursions where you're already seeing those boosts. Plus, one of the best boss hacks that I called out earlier, Perpetual Offense, you want to be using your specials to gain the most benefits out of Perpetual Offense. So again, something like recoil is in many ways going to be a run ender for you. It varies. So, certain champions can still get away with running suicides, but I would say far fewer can actually get away with it. So ideally, you probably do want to drop suicides. And last but not least, like I mentioned when I was talking about Aegon, you might want to drop all of your offensive masteries if you're going the Aegon build-up route, where you just want to, actually slow down the fights and you want to inflict as many hits as possible before the opponent dies. So yeah, you would just actually, recover your offensive masteries, hop into the incursions, and maybe 5-10 rooms in, however long before you feel comfortable putting them back on. Whenever Aegon is ramped up to a certain point, then okay, come back in here, put all your mastery points back in, and continue the run. Next up, I want to talk about items, when to use them, how best to use them, because you only get 5 per room, so you got to be careful with how you use these things. Not to mention, they're also pretty expensive. Like, let's go take a look at the Incursion store, scroll past all the pretty crystals, and yeah, we could see this team revive, 208 units. There's no way to get it outside of spending the units on it. Just for Incursions, oof, that doesn't really feel too good. But there are some tips that we can go over here to make the experience a little bit better. The first tip is to communicate with your partner before you ever use an item. Make sure that you're both on board with using items. You don't want to get into a situation where, yeah, you just picked up a whole bunch of these team revives, maybe some potions as well, and your partner dies and he's like, okay, good run. I don't have any items to use and I can't afford any either. So I'll see you next time. That's the worst thing, right? So make sure to talk with your partner first. Say, hey, I'm thinking about getting a couple of items to extend our run a little bit. How do you feel? Did you want to like stop in this room, or do you want to keep pushing? Things like that. Talk to your partner, guys. But before even going to those expensive revives and potions, don't forget that you could also boost up. And hey, if you boost up enough, you might get through the fight without having to use any items to revive and heal up your champions. And these boosts, they do not count towards the item limit. So pop as large of champion boost as you feel comfortable. And don't forget about the class boosts as well. When you have nodes that also increase the amount of damage you're dealing, especially when they increase your special damage, you might be able to generate another special attack immediately when popping something like this greater power boost. Another tip is that when you take down a boss, you can pick up a boss hack, you can revive your champions, or you can heal them up. If you notice, the revive will only heal them up 20%, whereas the team heal will heal them up 40%. So what you can actually do is you can pop a revive, an item, instead of using this tend wounds here. You can use an item to get your champions back to life, and then use a team heal, which will heal your champions up significantly more, because 20%, that's not much to work with. You might end up just having to revive your champions again. And you could even use this same strategy in order to get a hack instead. So what you can do is pop, a couple of items. Pop a team revive, pop a team potion. That might get your champions healthy enough where you can just pick up the boss hack. And it might suck in the moment because you're spending items, you're spending units on these items, but the next room is not going to be any easier, more than likely at least. So being able to use some heals now and then pick up a hack that's going to make your champion stronger, it could technically save you units in the long run. The kind of iffy part about the incursions is you never know what's coming next, and you might get totally roadblocked in the next room, which could feel pretty bad. But if you're going for that furthest push possible, it's a strategy that you'll likely have to use, or at least consider using. And lastly, when it comes to using items, even if your champions are alive and relatively healthy, you might want to use some items in the room that you're in just to really top them off, just to get you fully prepared for the next room, just in case something bad happens. That way, you go back to having 5 items to use. But using items is not the only way to heal, so let's talk about some free ways to heal. The first thing that you have to remember is that these fights, they have an 8-minute duration to them. So you can really stretch out the fight as much as you feel comfortable. Certain nodes that you might come across, or certain champions, they might put a debuff on you that doesn't actually do any damage, and you could just kind of abuse that to gain as much willpower healing as possible. Or certain champions, once again, like Hyperion, you can activate Hyperion's heal, and it has a cooldown to it, but in an 8-minute fight, you can get off multiple of those heals. It can get a little bit risky because the longer you're in a fight, the higher the chance that you can make a mistake as well. So you want to find that a careful balance of, getting a certain amount of healing and then just moving on to the next fight. And notice the 3 champions I brought in here. So Hyperion, he has that heal like I just mentioned. Morningstar has a heal in her abilities. And then Magneto, like I mentioned previously about buff cornucopia, you know, it just champions that gain buffs in general. You're able to use buff cornucopia with those buffs to not really guaranteed get a heal, but if you get lucky, if you gain enough buffs, eventually you'll land on heals, and that will keep your champion sustainable as well. Let's go over just some generalized tips. The first one might seem obvious at first, in that you want to find a strong partner. Of course, right? You can't solo the incursions. You gotta have 2 people in there, so you want your partner to be good. But the more subtle part to this tip is that the longer that you're playing with someone, you start to know their strengths and weaknesses. Now, in this incursion, both Thor and Gwenpool, they're pretty easy, but you might come across some champions in here that are just annoying to deal with. Maybe you find an Elsa or a Tigra or something like that, and you know that you struggle with those fights, so you can let your partner know, like, oh man, you know, please, can you take this fight, because I know I'm gonna throw the entire run away if I have to fight it. And maybe there's some champions that your partner has a tough time with too, so you guys can kind of learn each other's weaknesses and also learn how to complement each other's strengths at the same time. And by the way, if you do find yourself in a situation where you're up against the champion that you're not comfortable fighting, well, do some duels. Just go to the search, type in the champion's name, let's say Tigra for example, and you can go ahead and duel this champion. There's no fear at all, no worry about, you know, going to other areas of the game. You're not actually out of the incursion run until you quit out of the incursion run, just the same way that you're not out of a quest until you quit out of the quest by hitting the the red door button on the right side of the screen. The next tip is to slow down. We talked about having 8-minute timers in the fights, but there are no timers in here whatsoever. I've actually been inside this incursion for 24 hours now, and there's no timer, nothing's about to kick me out. I'm just chilling. So take your time, really look at every single fight in here, and think of any possibilities. If you come across a champion and node combination that you're just like, oh man, this is impossible, the game just totally screwed me over, well, really try to think outside the box, take a screenshot, send it to your alliance mates, ask them, hey, is there anything that you could think of to get me around this combination? Maybe they can help you come up with a strategy that you didn't originally think about, just because you're slowing down and taking that extra bit of time. Which brings me to scouting. Now, scouting is something that I was kind of just talking about when, you need to slow down in these runs, but you definitely want to just double check, all the champion and node interactions that are going to be in your run. Once you move past this first node where you do have the ability to swap your champions, there's no other spot on the map you can do that. So don't move right at the start of the fight. Scout everything out first, see if you need to swap in any champions, and again, communicate with your partner. Is there some fight that you can't take, or maybe some champion, maybe you can't swap anyone in to take this boss, but maybe your partner can. So just really, have that strong sense of communication with your partner. You also have plenty of time to get this challenge done. I actually don't see a timer on it. I don't know if it's just not showing it for whatever reason, but should have at least a month, if not longer, to do this challenge. So, maybe take a few practice swings at the incursions. If you are pushing for that special objective, you don't have to do your furthest push on your first try. The next tip is to rank up certain champions specifically for the incursions, which is easier said than done because we don't have an unlimited supply of rank up materials. But maybe you're able to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone, rank up a champion to help out in a variant, or rank up a champion that you maybe thought, oh, I don't really need to rank up a champ for this boss in Act 6 or something like that. But hey, if that champ can also double up in value and be a good counter to a boss in Act 6 while also being a good incursions champion, then it's just all the more reason to rank a champ up. Have some fun. I kind of called this tip out previously, but you really want to be on the lookout for champions like Abomination, Magic, or Iceman, that once their attack gets really high, you basically need to be immune or find some other way to completely counter their abilities. So just extra special call out for these champs to watch out for them. The next tip is sometimes the best defense is a strong offense. I mentioned a lot earlier on about how important it is to have something like perfect block or even pick up the resistance hacks, but You know, with the right champions, if you could amplify their damage high enough, you don't need this stuff. You can blow up the opponents nearly instantly and just get through the fight that much faster that way. So you do have to keep it in mind. You don't want to just totally tunnel vision and pick up some of the hacks that I called out. Really think things through. Again, slow the run down. The next tip is that, of course, you do have the ability to time out in these fights, just like people do in Alliance Quest. These fights are much longer, so it'll be much more annoying, but it is possible to hit the pause before dying and keep your champion alive. I don't really recommend doing it, though. I'm including it in this guide just for the sake of completeness, but there's a reason why this practice is ruled out of every single tournament that's ever been around for the Incursions to date. It goes against the spirit of the challenge, basically, and it's not going to make you a better player. So do your best to avoid using that type of strategy. You know, really try to pull out all the stops, try to think of every possible way, and use this as an excuse to get better at the game. Maybe there's certain techniques that you haven't practiced, like wall banking, where you're up against the wall, the opponent dashes in at you, you dash back, and you could immediately retaliate after their first attack. Learn little tricks like that, you know. Let this be a way to improve your skills. Improving your skills is actually the best reward that you can get in this game. Like, you know, these sig stones, they're great and all, but they're just sig stones. All they do is increase the sig level of one champion, whereas increasing your skills makes you better with every champion in the game, even when the game eventually evolves to 7-star champions and these 6-star sig stones become meaningless. Your skills will still be there, so use this challenge as an opportunity to advance your skills. And the last thing that I will say is have fun with it. Even if you aren't able to get to the desired room that you're trying to get to, even if you do kind of fail this challenge here, where you can't make it all the way to completing zone 20, it's okay. Life goes on, the game goes on, you know. Just use that as motivation, as fuel to be more prepared for the next challenge, and have fun with it. And that is my final tip. Just have fun with it. I'll be doing my run live soon enough here, and hopefully I will be able to snag all those 6-star sig stones, give you guys an example of some of the things that I talked about throughout this video, and good luck to you all. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.